All right. I am doing a listener questions episode of this podcast, and hopefully, you guys find it useful. But these were all questions that I collected from Stacker.news. If you're not a part of Stacker.news, check it out at stacker.news. You can connect your Lightning. You deposit Lightning to it, and you can earn Sats and upvote using Sats and stuff like that, which I find very very useful. All right, let's start with the most upvoted question. Hi Jimmy, thanks for all the content you push out for the ecosystem. You're welcome. Most Bitcoiners seem excited about Taro, but do stablecoins issued on Lightning pose any risks to the Bitcoin network? For example, in the unlikely event that Bitcoin needs to hard fork, should stablecoin issuers throw about their economic weight in deciding which forks survive and die? Yeah, this is the thing about any sort of fork on assets on top of Bitcoin or whatever, or any network really, is that you have two copies of the same ledger. So which ledger is authoritative, and that's kind of a very difficult question to answer. Even with the base asset, it's not entirely clear, right? When you have a hard fork, Ethereum is going to do the proof of work, proof of stake thing. Which one's the real Ethereum? I'm sure both sides will claim that depending on how the split goes or whatever. But generally, that's the market. And with a stablecoin issuer, it's interesting because you have somebody that decides, that's at the center, and they can kind of say this or that. The reason why it's a bigger problem on Ethereum right now is because a lot of these DeFi contracts and stuff use the stable coins issued by USDC or whatever to settle various kinds of contracts. So it's not entirely clear who's in control, and I think honestly both sides will probably get used and so on. But if one side says, hey, or if the issuer says, hey, I'm going to be on this one, and the DeFi contracts here will be honored, but not those, that kind of matters, and that's why the people on Ethereum are like a little bit worried that USDC or some of these stable coins will have some undue influence, but we knew that already. The thing about stable coins in general is that they are completely centralized. There's a single issuer, and they are sort of like the single point of failure. The way I like to think about stable coins is that they're really banks, and how they do the ledger and stuff is with the stable coin is whether it's tracked on one ledger or another, it's kind of immaterial. The ultimate thing is that you need to trust that they have the backing and that they can redeem the amount, and that's really how everything works. Now, what's going to happen if stable coins are huge on Taro or something like that? Well, essentially, you have a network, and you have an issuer, you have a bank or something like that, and they can issue on Bitcoin and transfer it through Lightning. You can do atomic swaps and stuff like that, and those can be very useful. But yeah, but I don't know if there would be necessarily like all kinds of like they would have enough weight to be able to say this side or that side. Because Bitcoin, the asset, is the main network, and that people are going to care way more about that than these other things that might be on top of it. And just to be clear, there have been lots of other assets on Bitcoin in the past. Mastercoin and Counterparty are two of the first, and they had all kinds of things on Bitcoin, and they transferred and stuff like that. And it's they basically stayed with Bitcoin main chain even during like the Bitcoin Cash hard fork and the many other hard forks that came out of Bitcoin. There was no chance that they were going elsewhere. Now, if Bitcoin had to hard fork, what would happen? I don't know. But I wouldn't say it's that much of a risk because the other assets on Bitcoin, they're not as entangled as they are in Ethereum. And I don't see them necessarily being that entangled. The bigger threat, I think, from sort of like a technical perspective, is that once you put these assets on, Bitcoin, these transactions that transfer them or settle them, in the case of Lightning, right? Like when you have the settlement transaction or whatever, you can't, all your security assumptions like kind of get thrown out the window because you don't know how much it's worth. So it might be like one sat that's transferring on chain in terms of Bitcoin, but the actual underlying sat that thing might represent like $1 trillion, in which case like your security assumptions about how much security you need or what's rational for a miner to do and stuff like that kind of go out the window. And it becomes like a harder calculus to figure out, is it worth for an attacker to reorganize something if they can do X, Y, or Z? These are the kind of questions that you have to ask when you have, an asset on top. And quite frankly, this, when I was a Color Coins developer in 2013, these were the things that we were thinking about is, okay, if you have these other assets, then, a lot of miner assumptions kind of go, crazy. And you don't know what's economically rational for someone to do. And the economic incentives are exactly why Bitcoin works. And if you tweak them even a little bit, you risk, you're adding a little bit more risk and you're increasing the attack surface, because what on the surface looks like an irrational economic action might actually be rational as soon as you add different assets to it. So I'd be a little bit more wary about that and so on. But yeah. So I don't know. I'm not sure like, Bitcoin is the right place to like sort of do these other assets and stuff like that. Like if you're gonna be a bank, Fedimint seems like a much better option. You get all kinds of privacy and stuff like that, and you're trusting the issuer. They can provide audits and stuff like that. So it's a lot easier to use something like that and make it, it's closer to how people are using it. And, the trust model is more obvious than sort of a stable coin where it's like supposedly decentralized, but it's definitely not. There's a central issuer and so on. So it feels like it's the wrong tool for the job to use like a blockchain to do it. It should really be something like Chaumian Bank or something like that. All right. Wow, that was a long answer. Second question is from SB. Hey, Jimmy, I really enjoy your content. What do you think about the recent Galoy OKX stable sats release? Specifically, what's your opinion on the counterparty risk, potential benefits, and where do you see all this going in 5 years? So just to review, stable sats is different than a stable coin because essentially they are using like an oracle for the price of Bitcoin to have sort of like the synthetic asset that trades like a dollar, that is kind of pegged through this oracle mechanism to do that. And it makes a few assumptions, most of it around the price of Bitcoin, that it is determinable at any point in time. You might have large spreads between exchanges and so on, but the oracle essentially gets to decide what's the actual price. And using something like mid-market price or something might be fine. But those are kind of the assumptions. The main counterparty risk is on the oracle in figuring out what the price is. And Price is kind of this fuzzy thing. It's you have bids and asks in various exchanges, but what's the actual price? Well, it's lots of market actors doing things at the same time. So what is it exactly? It's hard to say. The main benefit is that you don't need a bank. You trust an oracle, and you don't have to have like USDC does with a Circle, or USDT with the people that run Tether and so on. You don't have that risk. You have a different risk in trusting an oracle. Whether or not that's more or less, it's kind of hard to tell, and depends on sort of the volumes that you're talking about. So it could be very good, and they're trying different things because there is sort of like this demand for the U.S. dollar, outside the United States, because most people don't like their local currency. They'd much rather have the dollar, and if they could live on a dollar standard, they would. And in many cases, they kind of do, right? Like they keep their savings in dollars and only convert as they need to. I've heard, for example, that in Argentina, you don't you know keep much of the Argentinian peso. You keep things in dollars, and there's all sorts of capital controls and things like that the government does to sort of prevent you from being able to do that. But that's what most people do. They keep it in their savings in dollars because the other currencies are being debased away from them. But like, this is a thing. The U.S. dollar is also getting debased, and once they recognize Bitcoin as like the more stable form of value, or the more secure, and better store of value, then I think they switch to Bitcoin instead. We're not there yet because the dollar has been sort of like the standard since Bretton Woods, at least, which is somewhere on the order of 80 years now. So that's what people prefer. So I see this as sort of like a temporary thing. Now, how temporary that is, I don't know. It could last a significant amount of time. And in the meantime, something like stable sats or a stable coin or something like that, like I see them as destroying non-USD currencies, because the dollar is just superior for global settlement, for storing value, than the local currency might be, and that's really where this sort of demand for stable coins comes from. Now, is this particular implementation, stable sats, using DLCs and oracles and stuff like that to make the synthetic dollar, going to be useful? Probably. Galoy is one of the partners, and they're seeing this need in El Salvador, and clearly the people in El Salvador would like to use the dollar more than Bitcoin, because it's got a longer history and so on. But I think at some point it goes over to Sats later anyway. So I don't know. It's got a lot of potential, but it remains to be seen just how much of a difference it's going to make. All right, let's see the next question here. Distribution of wealth on the Bitcoin network. Someone on the daily discussion claims to know multiple people with 1.7 million Bitcoins each. Now, this is just flat out impossible. I just don't like several people. Let's just say three times 1.7 million is like 5.1 million Bitcoin. Like that's some insane number, and they're saying it's controlled by a few people. And this straight up FUD. Where are you getting this information? And this is how rumors and things like that start, and people think they know something when they really don't. They like to claim things. Like there's always like random rumors and stuff like that. So Hey, my response is basically SIGs, or you're kind of BSing, right? Like, we verify here, we don't trust whoever this rumor comes from. You don't just believe the rumor because someone says so. There's always sort of like rumors of this kind that are generally self-serving in some way, or to the people that are giving it. So, I've heard rumors about like some sheik in the Middle East that wants to buy like several $billion worth of Bitcoin. That might or might not be true, but most of the time, like until it happens, I just generally don't believe it. And it's a way to get you to behave a certain way. It's propaganda. All right, not question, but I wanted to say thanks for the contribution. Well, you're welcome, I guess. Um, I mean, I don't know if this is referring to my open source contributions, or content I'm putting out, or maybe both, or I don't know, whatever. But this is sort of like a passion project for me because I want to see sound money. I think it's really beneficial to civilization. Let's see the next one. I'm always interested in which projects bring people into Bitcoin and which only draw from the existing Bitcoin system. I think this is always an interesting discussion, in my opinion. So, like, what projects bring people into Bitcoin and which appeal only to the people that are already in the Bitcoin ecosystem, I guess, is the question. I mean, the main feature of Bitcoin that people like is 21 million, right? It's scarce. It's a hedge against inflation, or it's a good store of value. It's much more certain than all of these uncertain other things. So I would say that that's the main reason people come into Bitcoin. It's not because you can buy socks, or a coffee or something like that. The main reason is for store value. Now there are some exceptions to this. Certainly with remittances, and maybe people in countries without good POS systems. For them, Lightning might be a huge upgrade, and that may be why some people get into it. Certainly in El Salvador, that seems to be the case. But the vast majority of people, they're getting in because they see it as a better long-term store of value than the US dollar or something else. And that's why they're using it. This is the sort of marginal benefit that they are getting out of Bitcoin, and it's a very good benefit. I think that's why. Now, there's a lot of different existing things in the Bitcoin ecosystem that appeal to people that already have Bitcoin. If you're on the Bitcoin standard, the extra step of converting to fiat and then being able to spend it is kind of annoying. So, when you have projects that will help you spend Lightning in different places, it might appeal to those people. Vast majority of people, though, they're not looking for yet another form of payment. Though, if it's private, maybe. But most people don't care that much about privacy. So, vast majority of people, they get in for the store value, and then all of this other stuff is sort of like ancillary. They're sort of the extension stuff that are nice to haves, but they're not the reason why they got into Bitcoin. And that's the main distinction for me, is that you might buy a phone so you can check your email or something like that, but if it can also be used as a remote for your TV, that's kind of like a secondary thing that you'd be appreciative of. But you wouldn't buy a phone because it can control your TV, right? Like that's not why people buy phones. So that's how I see the question. All right, let's look at the next one. Someone has already touched on this, but I want to know your opinion on things like stable channels, stable coins on Bitcoin, etc. Will they benefit or detriment to the ecosystem, and do they align with Bitcoin's ethos? Yeah, whether or not they align with Bitcoin's ethos is really the new question here. I think I've answered a lot of the other stuff. And I don't think it does, because I think stable coins, at least the backed ones, are, based on trusting a bank. And if you're going to trust, I really think Xiaomi banks are going to be way better. And that seems to me the better way to go. And if you're having to trust an Oracle on some sort of stable sats kind of thing, I mean, that might work. And the synthetic asset, may be useful to some people, but we're trying to disrupt the current system. We're not trying to, I don't know, be in it as much. So I think from an ethics standpoint, or the desire of the Bitcoiners themselves, and sort of what this whole thing represents, it's kind of like a marginal, thing that might be useful to some people, but I don't think is the main thing. All right, let's see the next one. Which peer-to-peer messaging data technologies outside of Bitcoin do you like the most? Are you excited about any of the new developments? Well, the peer-to-peer messaging is, I think Umbrel is working on like a browser, and I saw their demo with, people able to do video and stuff like that. That seems interesting, genuinely interesting to me. And they're doing it in a peer-to-peer way because it makes sense to do that, especially for something like video. The direct connection between the two is going to be way more efficient than going through a central server. But is that, what's the actual stack on that? From a technology perspective, I don't actually know, and they haven't released anything, so it's kind of hard to tell. So, yeah, kind of a difficult question to answer. I don't know. All right. Do you agree Bitcoin has price insensitive buyers? Examples include transaction service users and dollar cost averagers. If a commodity has price insensitive buyers, who sets the price and what should it be? Well, price insensitive buyers just mean that they place a very high value on something, but the price is always determined sort of by the marginal buyers. So the price insensitive buyers will buy until they have no more dollars, and they'll be all in on Bitcoin. The people that determine the price are the people that wouldn't otherwise buy, but then do buy, when the price is kind of low enough. And those, change, their reasoning or whatever is kind of unknowable, because they're always kind of changing. So those are the people that set the price. The people that are buying no matter what, they're already kind of on the Bitcoin standard. They're at the extremes. It's the people at the margins that set the price, because the people at the extremes have either spent all their money or planning to in getting to the point where they're on a Bitcoin standard. And they don't have infinite dollars. If they did, then the price of Bitcoin would be infinity, but they don't. So they run out of money, and that's it. But the more people that you get like that, the higher the price goes, because the supply of Bitcoin is fixed. So the marginal buyer has to go up higher in order to get it. So that's who sets the price. All right, what do you see as the next layer on which we build onto the network? I would say right now it's Lightning, and a lot of people are using the fact that people are running servers to create sort of like some interesting stuff on top of Lightning. This is in large contrast to something like Web3, which is completely centralized. And with a token and all that. I mean, it's just that's no different than like Facebook or Google from an architecture standpoint. They're just like bolting a token onto it so they can scam people. So the layer to use, at least to me, that's genuinely different and potentially very, very interesting, is the Lightning Network, where people are using servers and so on. All right. Do you think the introduction of Wall Street will improve or increase in potential liquidity or decrease through paper claims Bitcoin adoption? Yeah, I'm always like kind of skeptical of Wall Street because they tend to want to make banks out of everything. So if they make a bank out of Bitcoin, then it's possible that they can fractional reserve lend. And they're also very good at getting people to trust them, even though they're not deserving of that trust. In which case, they could get away with fractional reserve for a while. In which case, the Bitcoin price will sort of come down because they're artificially increasing the supply. But this is why we say not your keys, not your coins. Otherwise, you have a claim to some liability on someone else's balance sheet. So that's not really Bitcoin. The Bitcoin that you own are the ones that you have keys to, and this is why we say not your keys, not your coins. All right. It is usually hard to explain Bitcoin in a few sentences and not getting too much into details. What is your opening line for a no coiner? The opening line for me is Bitcoin is digital gold. And then I explain why being digital is important and why gold, something like gold, which is limited and not controlled by anybody, is very important. And that seems to be a decent way to get people to understand what Bitcoin is, that it's digital and scarce and decentralized. And that's not really an asset that we've ever had before. Or anything like what we've had before. So it's a genuine innovation, a genuinely different asset on the net in the world, and that's how I try to describe it. Another day, another Bitcoiner creating a podcast. Not to be a hater, but geez, does everyone in the space need their own pod? I mean, you're going to complain about too many choices. It just, like, if you don't like them, just don't listen to them. Why are you complaining about there being more, unless somehow you want to listen to all of them or something? You don't listen to stuff you find uninteresting. But if they're all interesting, then really your complaint is I have too many choices. Someone filter for me. And honestly, there is something to that. There's when we have abundance, curation or your ability to pick what's good becomes more difficult. This is sort of like the paradox of choice, where if you have a lot of choices, the cost to evaluate all of them becomes a little more difficult. Hopefully, I'm giving enough signal that people come and listen to me, without necessarily having to examine it deeply closely or something like that. But that's more on you. Like, why are you complaining about it? Go do something about it. Go find a curator or something else, rather than complaining there's too many and you can't make decisions. All right. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to answer that, troll. When teaching about Bitcoin, what are some of the bigger stumbling blocks for novice developers that you have come across? Yeah, there's a bunch of them. They're usually not used to programming like on a byte by byte basis, which you have to do in Bitcoin, or knowing things are in little endian order or something like that. A lot of novice programmers don't realize like how UTXO systems actually work, where if you're giving something less than the amount in the UTXO, you have to send change to yourself. So I've seen transactions that forgot to include change and essentially just give a bunch to the miner. Not on mainnet, but like on testnet. Although that's happened on mainnet too. So that's a stumbling block. The other one is most of them don't know elliptic curve cryptography, which is why I started my book on elliptic curve cryptography. Most people don't understand it or know it, and there's no reason they should, because it's kind of like it's not really taught in school unless you happen to be a math major at a university or something like that and take a particular class in elliptic curves. So that seems to be a stumbling block. I know for a fact that the place where most people get stuck in my book is chapter 4, the signature and verification algorithm. It's kind of hard to grasp your mind around how public key cryptography essentially works. About this idea that you can prove that you know something without showing what it is, and that's the magic of public key cryptography, and that's again hard to grasp. Like, cryptography in general is not necessarily intuitive to people that are good at programming, because it is so heavily math based. So I try to teach that, though I'm not entirely sure I've been completely successful. All right, let's see. Hi, Jimmy. Would love to hear you talk about your journey before Bitcoin. I was able to hear about a little of it at the BBB prayer breakfast last year. It really had an impact on me. Thanks again for everything you do, Jimmy. First of all, thank you for coming to that prayer breakfast. I was kind of sad that we couldn't do it again this year, but I'm just way too busy and had too many things going on, so I couldn't coordinate one or something like that. But last year we did it, both days, and a lot of people came out, and it was a lot of fun. Not just fun, but it was a good way to start the conference, right? Now, my journey before Bitcoin is well, I don't know. I guess you're kind of asking for a life story, and since I have some time, maybe it's a good time to do that. Let's do that. All right. So I was born in Korea, and I immigrated to the States when I was 8 years old. So I'm a Korean American, I guess, and first generation, technically speaking. Thankfully, I came early enough that I didn't have to have like an accent or something like that, which unfortunately a lot of people that come maybe like in middle school or high school like end up with like an accent for the rest of their lives or whatever. I was fortunate enough to not have an accent, or I don't know, maybe there's like a distinctive accent, but most people tell me I don't have a Korean one, at least. But that was when I came over, and shortly thereafter I fell in love with computers. I didn't even know what they did, but I wanted one, and I had a natural affinity towards them from the very beginning. And I enjoyed being able to manipulate like a machine and getting them to do stuff. And that's really what programming is. I was pretty good at math, and that was what I did through high school. I did like all the math competitions and stuff like that. I was a math major in college. I participated in some math competitions then too. But I wasn't good enough to like get to the really top level stuff. So I had planned to be like a math professor. I even like did like a study abroad program for math majors and stuff like that. But what happened was that I realized like I didn't really want to go down this road. So I went to programming instead, and that was something that I enjoyed all through high school. I did some programming competitions and stuff back then too. And this was way before you had like lead code competitions on the web or whatever. So you know I don't know, programming just sort of came very naturally to me, and I've enjoyed it. Um, yeah, and most of my career, I guess, started in startups, and I did startups for, I don't know, a good 15 years before really pivoting and going towards Bitcoin. Although, I guess it's not too much of a pivot since, hey, I do a lot of programming related stuff. But yeah, I was kind of working in the fiat world, and a lot of my articles like kind of reference a lot of what's happened there, and my experience in sort of like the corporate world. Even at the startup level, the reason why I talk about VCs and stuff like that is because I've had a lot of experience with them and stuff. So I would say that it's something that I'm familiar with, and yeah, that was I guess my life before Bitcoin changed it, and yeah, it's changed it significantly. So yeah, very grateful, obviously. All right, let's see this last question. I've heard a few people say that the US government is more likely to go back to the gold standard than they are to allow Bitcoin to replace the dollar, because going back to gold would at least allow for greater regulation control. It seems like if that happened, Bitcoin might actually have a legitimate competitor. Do you have any thoughts on that? Well, I don't think the government will go back to a gold standard. And the reason is doing so would be kind of like putting toothpaste back into a tube, because they were on a gold standard and they are still kind of nominally on a gold standard. So, the dollar is supposedly pegged to like $35 an ounce, but that's like some accounting thing that they keep doing. We know that gold has a price and it's way more than $35 an ounce. That's just sort of like what they say in order to keep with previous regulations or something like that. If they were to go back to a gold standard, that would be pretty difficult. You would need a lot of gold to back it, because if it's not a gold standard unless you can convert to gold. So I would need the ability to take dollars and convert them to gold at my pleasure. Like, given the history of the gold, of like sort of dollar back gold or whatever, not many people are going to trust the government to not debase again. So the reason why fiat money or like dollar bills and stuff like that exists is to make it much more convenient. But digital stuff is way more convenient than physical handover of even paper. So they've kind of let the digital cat out of the bag, and value transfer of Bitcoin is going to, has like sort of the best of both worlds. So I don't see them really saying, okay, well, let's go back to a gold standard. That convertibility is going to be like way too much of a logistical nightmare, I think. And I don't think there's political will to do it. There's too many economists that don't believe the gold standard or whatever. So in the meantime, I think Bitcoin takes over one individual at a time. Now, the other argument for that is, they see Bitcoin succeeding and then they pivot to the gold standard as a way to sort of preserve the dollar. Might happen, but I think, if that's the reason that happens, that means Bitcoin is gaining strong momentum already, and it's still harder than gold. So I think it wins for that reason. So yeah, I mean, that's my thought on it. It's possible for Bitcoin to have a legitimate competitor in gold. And Safety talks about that in his books. But I just don't see it happening, and I don't think it would be, any government would engage in until it was pretty obvious that Bitcoin was going to win. Yeah. Anyway, that's I think about it for all of the questions. It's been a while since I've done one of these, and I apologize for not doing more of them. I'm going to try to have more long form content where I'll think about stuff more, because I'm not able to go and record so many more interviews. But yeah, we'll see what the future of this podcast looks like. Anyway, thank you very much. Let me read the other thing that I should read, which is the sponsorship stuff. Unchained Capital is a sponsor of the podcast. I am an advisor to the company. I know the team well, and I'm excited for what they are building. If you need multi-sig collaborative custody or a Bitcoin native financial services partner, learn more at unchained.com. All right, Fiat Delenda S. This song is done.